was nearing 5 o'clock, and I was across the street, impatiently waiting for his arrival. I knew he was a creature of habit, a slave to his schedule if nothing else, and just like clockwork, as 5 o'clock came, so did he, pulling up into the driveway, as he no doubt had 1,000 times. My eyes narrowed, a flush of hot hatred rising in me as I watched him vanish inside. "You cheating prick," I whispered under my breath, and crossed the street, walking up to the door like I had business there. I tested the door handle, shaking my head slightly when I found it unlocked, and made my way inside. Idiot. Quietly closing the door, I removed my heels, doing my best not to alert him to my presence. As I padded across the living room, the floor groaned softly as I went. "Is that you, my sweet?" His voice came from upstairs. Damn it. I rubbed my throat, trying to loosen it up before calling back in my best attempt at imitating the woman he was expecting. "Yes, hon." "Why don't you come on up? I'm feeling a little frisky," he chuckled. "Be right there, stud." I rolled my eyes at his predictability and gave up the illusion of stealth. I strode into the kitchen, searching briefly until I found the big kitchen knife. I admired it for a moment before the laundry room caught my eye. Yes, perfect. I slipped into the laundry room and out of my street clothes, throwing on one of his dress shirts, which fell to mid-thigh alluringly. Glancing at the collar, I grinned, pressing a nice red kiss to the starched cotton. My lipstick made a perfect impression. Satisfied with my costume, I made my way up the stairs, knife hidden behind my back. He was waiting for me, shirtless and pantless, spread out on the bed like an offering. It shocked me to see him. I couldn't blame him. "Bella?" he asked, confusion written across his face. "Yes, Fernando." "What are you?" He paused and then grinned, comprehension and devious pleasure spreading across his face. "Oh, I see." I smiled at him, carefully keeping the knife hand behind my back, as I put a finger to my ruby lips. "Shh, she'll be out all day." "Now this is a perfect day, isn't it?" he said, mostly for his own satisfaction, because he couldn't have known what I had planned, and if he had, I doubt he would have felt the same way about it. I nodded, though, as it was absolutely shaping up to be a perfect day for me. "You've been a naughty boy," I said, and moved to the bed, standing over him. "Why don't we play a little game?" "What did you have in mind?" He was grinning even wider now, looking as enthusiastic as I'd ever seen him. "Oh, just something to make you enjoy the release all the more," I said, gracefully hiding the knife on the floor, as I dug around the nightstand for some silk socks. I'd watched him long enough to know he didn't bother keeping the nice ones in the dresser. With a hungry grin, I pulled his right hand to the bedpost and tied it securely. He winced slightly at the force, growling out a playful, "Oh, you little minx." I gave him a nice show as I crawled all over him to tie his other hand and straddled him to slide a long black sock over his eyes like a blindfold. "There we go," I purred. "I'm so ready for you," he said, thrusting his hips in the air. I snickered, trailing my hand over his stomach and thigh as I slid off the bed. "I can tell, but you sit tight, stud." I picked up the knife. "I will get a surprise for you." "More surprises." "Oh, I cannot wait," he said, still blissfully ignorant of what I had in store. I wandered downstairs, taking my time to retrieve my phone. After pulling up the most recent number, I hit the call button. 2 rings and the line was open silence. "We're all set," I said and hung up. Less than a minute later, a figure walked up to the door and waited. I opened it to see his wife, Sasha, in a drab power suit, smart heels, beige hose, and rather plain makeup. She looked me up and down with a disapproving scowl. "I still don't." I shushed her, pointing above us as I mouthed a quiet, "Upstairs, quietly. You'll see." She scoffed softly and stepped out of her heels before following me, careful to match my movements as much as she could, so it would sound like only one person returning. "Oh, sweetie, I'm waiting," Fernando cooed from the bedroom. "Shit, too soon, you moron." His wife looked at me, possibly even angrier than before, but she silently continued up the steps with me. That was close. This won't work right if she doesn't see him. When we got to the bedroom, I stepped aside, and she walked alone. At first, she froze, apparently stunned by the vision of her husband tied to the bed, blindfolded and eager. When she finally made it to the foot of the bed, her face was a twisted mask of fury. "Fernando," I said as I moved in behind her, "I'm ready. Say my name and beg me to start." Oh, my naughty Bella," he grinned. "I'm so ready for you to screw me. I need you so bad. You don't know what it's been like." With a gasp, his wife rushed to his side and ripped the blindfold off. "Fernando, how could you?" "Sasha?" Fernando gasped. Her voice caught, and she whimpered around a suppressed sob. "After 15 years, how could you do this to us?" This was it. The perfect moment. I rushed her from behind, slashing the knife through her throat in one swift motion. She jerked slightly as I held her by the hair, tilting her head back and pushing her body forward as a fountain of blood poured from her neck. "Sasha!" he screamed, flailing against the socks binding him. "Bella, what have you done?" "From the broken heart of this woman, I offer to you, O Arioch, the body of this adulterer. May the heartbreak of his wife bring forth your vengeful hatred for his soul." "What are you?" Fernando sputtered, trying not to swallow the blood that splattered his face. What? Stop this!" Sasha's body relaxed, falling forward onto the bed as the life slowly left her, and I struggled to pull her head up to make sure she continued to bleed on him. "Come forth to your new vessel, Arioch. Come to me, your dark mistress," I shouted. Convulsions racked his body, and his gaze grew distant before disappearing as his eyes rolled back. I rolled my eyes. "Oh my God, finally," I said as I dropped Sasha's body on the bed between us. She bounced and rolled to the side, her eyes watching me, betrayed, scared, and dying. I leaned down to her. "Oh, don't be so upset. There is an afterlife. I just hope you did the right things for the right side," I said, gently nudging her to the ground, where she slumped, lifeless as far as I could tell. And thank goodness. Now I'm finished with her and ready to complete a pact I had entered long ago. Only a moment later, Fernando's eyes rolled forward, red and full of hate. He turned to me. "Oh, my faithful Bella." I frowned, stripping out of Fernando's shirt to stand exposed before his body. "I give you a child, and we're all square, right? Your debt paid. Tenfold," he grinned. "Good," I said, straddling him. I was all business, ready to get this done and my soul off the chopping block. "Then let's do this." The debt I'd accrued with Arioch was an old one, made 10 years ago when I was 13. Ever since I was a little girl, I recalled my pious mother in poverty, always talking about how God had a plan for us. "Jesus Christ will see us through this," she said while begging on the street for our next meal. "Christ will see us through these tribulations." Apparently, Christ's plan for us involved human traffickers. When I look back, I often wonder if her faith ever broke. If, as those awful men had their turns on her, while they chained me to the neighboring bed, she ever once doubted that Jesus would save her. He didn't, of course. Jesus, God, neither of them came for us, and eventually they ran out of time to help. I still recall how one day her cries grew smaller and smaller until they stopped altogether and her face went blank, as yet another nameless man saddled her up like a prize pony and had his way with her. She watched me. She always watched me, and I watched with a terrifying chill as the dim light in her eyes faded into nothing. She left me. I was alone, terrified, chained to a bed, and alone except for the man still taking his pleasure from what she'd left behind. She was long since gone when the final asshole asked why she was so cold. "She's dead," I squeaked out, with a dry throat choked with grief, anger, and fear. What would they do to me now that their favorite toy was gone? "What do you mean she's dead?" he asked, looking down at my mother's body. "You're a liar. She ain't dead. Are you, bitch?" He slapped her. The sound of his hand against her cold, wet cheek was dull and flat. I still hear it sometimes as I am falling asleep, and I wake up in a cold sweat, panicked and alone. When he finally realized I was telling the truth and that he'd been thrusting away at a corpse for the last 5 minutes, he scrambled off the bed to vomit in the corner. After he left, no one else came back. They left me in there with her. For 2 days, I cried, watching my mother's eyes cloud over as her body grew pale and stiff. I remember going to sleep one of those nights and watching her dead eyes in the dark. I was hungry, cold, and alone as I had ever been. I knew I would die there, forgotten in that room as she was. In the dark that night, I asked her, "Mama, is this God's plan?" Despite the thick shadow separating us, I thought I saw her move. My heart froze as I watched. Suddenly, still like a rabbit hiding from a fox, some instinct buried deep inside me screamed for me to keep quiet, even as my mind tried to reason with it. Mother was dead. She couldn't have moved. It was dark, and eyes play tricks, especially when you have had nothing to eat or drink in 2 days. And yet, my heart thundered in my ears, and cold sweat poured down my back at the certainty that I was not alone anymore. I felt eyes upon me, watched as I hadn't been since the men had left us there. Then my mother's corpse began to speak to me. "Yes, dear," she said in a voice that was hers, but used the wrong way. I tried to scream, but the sound wouldn't come. I could only stare at the dark shape of her body where it lay, and pray I was only dreaming. Her eyes, though, her eyes I could still see, pale and almost glowing, watching me intensely. "Christ has a plan for us all, dear. Why? Are you dissatisfied with his plan for you?" I didn't answer. I knew better than to answer. This was a trick, a trap. I turned my wrists, as I had 100 times since they chained me to the bed. They were red and caked with dried blood. They ached from the cuffs biting into them, but I tried to free them anyway. Tried to escape whatever was possessing my mother's body. It felt like tears should have been in my eyes, but they were dry as I trembled on the bed, paralyzed by her milky gaze. Her face grinned at me. "Would you like another option?" I hesitated, licking my dry lips nervously. I knew better than to hesitate. My heart and some deeper instinct still screamed danger to me, but there was also angry desperation listening in the dark corners of my soul. I knew no godly creature could speak to me through my mother's blackened lips, and for as much as it felt like walking off the edge of a cliff to challenge fate, I felt compelled to respond by something darker inside me, something forged over a lifetime of living on the streets and tempered in that filthy bed. "I'm listening," I rasped, trying not to look at my mother in the eye. "What if I protected you, kept the men from using you?" it whispered. I shook my head, moving my gaze to the floor. They came for me before they ran the train on Mama. 1 or 2 had me. Mother's face frowned. "What could I offer you, child? Your suffering is great, and Christ has no mercy for you in this plan. But I can change your stars. Name it, and it is yours." I thought about this. Instinct still drove my racing heart, and starvation clouded my thoughts. But the shadow in my soul reached out and brought with it a single request. Vengeance, I rasped. I want vengeance on them. My blood thrummed with the idea, singing a horrifying song I would never have imagined myself capable of embracing before that very moment. But after it had come, it was all I wanted. I want vengeance on them all. I knew what I was asking. Mama always spoke of the deadly sins, and I knew vengeance was just an offshoot of wrath. But I didn't want to die on that bed, especially knowing those men were out there, living. A strange calm settled over me when I accepted that. A smile crept over her face. Would you like to make a deal? Seeing is believing, I said, surprised at my confidence. Mama didn't raise a fool or an idiot. I've had to survive on my own for too long to get taken advantage of by some corpse. Mama's face frowned. I am more than a corpse. Anger flared in me. Anger I'd kept stifled for a long time. Anger at Mother for putting us on the street and letting us get taken. Anger at the world for allowing all of it to happen. Anger at the men for their abuses. Anger at this creature for splitting hairs when my blood screamed for vengeance. Murder one of those bastards first, I growled, and then we'll see if you can help me. Otherwise, you're as useless as God. Mama's corpse sat up, snapping the chain that tied it to the bed, as if it were nothing but paper. You wish to see the power of my master? So be it. But be warned, girl. I consider this part of any deal we strike. I nodded. And if you can't do what I ask, then I know you're nothing to fear. Mama's corpse shambled to the door like the demon had fixed puppet strings to her limbs. The inhuman motions unnerved me as she jerked forward slowly. When she finally arrived at the door, she slapped it several times. I sat up and crossed my legs to watch, curious of what that demon had planned. Soon I heard footsteps in the hall. You little whore, if you've escaped. A man stood in the doorway, framed by light spilling in behind him. I remembered his stench and his stupid thin mustache. His clothing was dirty, and he had a gun at his side. He was one of the men who'd raped me when I'd first arrived. I rattled the chains on my swollen wrists. I'm still tied up. He glared at me. Then what made that noise? Huh, bitch? He crossed the threshold, moving so fast he didn't see Mama behind the door. Mama did, I said, pointing with a smile. A strange and startling deep level of satisfaction washed over me as my mother's corpse lurched towards him. I don't know what drove me to say it, but once the words were out, I knew they were just right. Mama wants you to screw her again. He turned in confusion and screamed, pulling the gun from his pants and firing at her chest. Mama didn't react to the shot physically. She only let out an inhuman screech as she dove on the man, her teeth gnashing and tearing at his throat. I sat up in the bed, smiling wide as the demon and my mother feasted on him. After a moment or two of him struggling beneath her, his body writhing on the cold floor, I realized it wasn't his flesh the demon was after. Not directly. It was slowly gnawing on his shoulder, when it could have gone for his neck. No, death wasn't the immediate goal. The demon wanted to savor it. I realized it wasn't the demon who wanted to savor it. I did. The demon knew what I wanted, that I didn't just want these men dead. They would be too easy for them. No, the demon knew what I wanted. Vengeance. I wanted them to suffer for what they had put me through. My heart, for the first time in years, soared. Yes, I shouted to the demon, encouraging it. Savor it. I was speaking both to the demon and to myself. I wanted more. I wanted so much more. My mind raced at the prospects before me. Despite all my mother's prayers and times in church, God never answered us. An evening in a church to sleep was the only respite we had in those days. And that was the best God had ever done for Mama and me. But this demon, in mere moments of being asked, it had done what I wanted. Better yet, it did so on good faith, At least so far. The man screamed, "Help me! Get it off of me!" I was on cloud 9 as he whimpered. He was so pathetic. I sat on the bed, lording over him. "Beg me," I said with a knowing grin. What? He shouted as he tried to push my mother's head and her hungry maw off of him. "I said," I teased, "beg me to save you. Beg me to call Mama off. Beg for your life." "Please, save me," he pleaded. "I'm begging you, for Christ's sake, save me." For Christ's sake? Every year I suffered, my mother looked to Christ. Christ, every year, asked more of her. Over and over she would pray. Before we were homeless, she would give alms, spend weekends in church instead of working. All the while ignorant of the fact that my father was gambling away everything we had. Christ's sake. It was even in church, when the police came to tell my mother he was dead, killed by a loan shark he had screwed over. They never caught him, of course. Christ couldn't give me justice then. That hot anger filled me once more as I narrowed my eyes on the man below. Screw Christ. I looked down to the demon. I don't want to hear him speak about God or Christ ever again. "No," the man screamed. A poor decision for him, all things considered. Mama took his opened mouth as an opportunity. While his mouth was opened, she latched on. My pupils dilated as the rush hit me hard, watching the terror in his eyes as I heard the sharp scrape of her teeth against his, trying to push her mouth out of his. An extra layer of satisfaction was that days ago he had forced his mouth into hers. Now, she would take back what he gave her. Now he would suffer for what he did to us. His screams were music to my ears as Mama bit out his tongue. Mama's corpse rose and made a show of tilting her head back and swallowing something thick and heavy as the man screamed and wailed in pain. Have you ever heard a man try to speak without a tongue? It's a sad thing to hear. It makes a man sound like an animal. For once, that's all he was. His true self laid bare. Nothing but a scared and loathsome animal below me. After a deliciously extended period, I watched the life drain from his eyes, just as it did from my mama. A shiver ran down my spine as I recalled that moment. It felt like a lifetime ago. My heart was hammering in my chest with excitement as I felt warmth come over me. A fire was lit, and there was no extinguishing it. 4 more men rushed to the door, and all of them horrified at the sight before them. I turned to the demon inside my mother's corpse. "What else can you do?" I asked. Mama's face twisted into a grin. "You waste time. This form is fading. What is your choice, girl?" I looked to the 4 men in the doorway. Vengeance. The chains fell off of my wrists, and I grew dizzy. Before I knew it, I was in the same bed, but my mother's corpse was still next to me, unmoving. Was it all just a fever dream? My heart sank for a moment, before the same voice slipped from my mama's unmoving mouth. "Offer me the first soul, and I shall take the others. Feed me, souls of the damned, before God can forgive them, and you shall receive my boon," it whispered. I got up. My handcuffs were undone, as they were in the vision. I grabbed the chains that were keeping me tied down. I slid them through the metal bars of the bed and dragged them to the door. I slapped the chains against the wall, standing behind it as the demon did in my vision, ready to do what needed to be done. The demon had informed me that I had to get the ball rolling myself. Nothing comes without a price. The lesson was simple. If I wanted my deepest, darkest desires, I had to do the legwork. My hands would have to get dirty. "You little whore, if you've escaped, I'll..." He trailed off as he came to the doorway. "Where the hell?" He walked in, not seeing me in my bed. I threw the chains over his head and pulled them tight over his neck, pulling down hard. He struggled, but I kept tightening the chains. A punch landed on my shoulder. Under any normal circumstances, the pain would have knocked me to the floor, but I kept the vision of my mother's body over his, ripping his tongue out, and the adrenaline in my body propelled me forward. I watched his eyes roll into the back of his head, and he finally went limp. "Bring him here," Mama's corpse said. With a dedicated effort, I hefted him up by his shoulders. I dragged him to Mama's bedside, dropping him unceremoniously before her. Now what? Offer him as sacrifice to me. "Who are you?" I asked. "I am Ariok," it hissed. "Pledge to me." I looked down at the passed-out prick. "I offer this soul to you, Ariok, and through this sacrifice, I ask you to fulfill my vengeance on this man and his comrades." I looked at my mama's cold, dead eyes, hate filling me. "Do this in my name." "What is your name?" "BellaDelAvana," I whispered. Her corpse shot up and grinned wide, moving the fallen body of the man I had brought down. I backed away and watched with deep satisfaction as she began to devour his flesh, ripping at his face first, which woke him. "What is this? Oh God, stop!" he screamed. I lorded over him. His screams reached a crescendo, filling me with deep satisfaction. Finally, the demon slammed my mother's head into his chest, snapping his sternum and ripping out his heart. As the man's mouth shot open, his final breath passed through him. Within that breath was a wisp of steam, a wisp the demon ensured it could inhale, taking great satisfaction in doing so. With his final breath, and possibly even his soul consumed, Mama's body shot upright. The demon began to contort, limbs and joints snapping at unnatural angles. After many a sickening snap and crack, she fell to the floor on all fours. She barely looked human, closer to that of some kind of twisted vision of an animal. Her head hung upside down, her back facing the floor. An inhuman screech bellowed out as she crouched down. Her stomach arched upwards along with her chest. The snap of a bone and unnatural clicking of joints that were shifting and moving in the wrong direction accompanied her every movement. As the vision had shown, 4 men rushed to the doorway. Like the vision, they all appeared shocked and appalled at the scene before them. As the color drained from their faces, I turned to the demon. "Mama," I whispered, "make them suffer." The creature that inhabited my mother's body yowled and rushed the men. 3 of them threw one of their comrades into her and ran. She made short work on him, flying up off the floor with enough force to snap his leg. Then she latched onto his face and ripped his cheek off, exposing his jaw muscles and teeth. She left him prone on the floor before giving chase to the others. I couldn't see what was happening, but from the hallway, a beautiful sound echoed. Screams from the fleeing men and inhuman cries from Mama greeted me, peppered with the odd gunshot. A sweet satisfaction came over me as I recalled how the bullets did nothing to stop Mama's assault. The man on the floor whimpered, crawling towards his fallen friend. Broken bone poked through his flesh, staining his pants and leaving a trail of blood behind him. I approached him and showed my sympathy for his plight by stepping on his exposed bone. He wailed in pain and tried to grab me. The heat filled my body as I glared at him. "You will burn," I whispered. The power pulsing through me was intoxicating, and I knew where it stemmed from. The demon I had made a pact with. I knew what I wanted. "Burn," I whispered. Steam rose from his body as he screamed, unable to speak clearly due to the hole in his face. He babbled for help as best he could as his clothing began to char from heat rising from inside of him. "Burn!" I shouted. His hair curled as if I had a lighter over it. He tore at his flesh writhing on the ground. But the fire wasn't on the outside. No, I was very purposeful in what I was doing. The fire I felt would burn him from the inside out. I said burn. With this, flames shot from under his skin, his screams rising in a beautiful crescendo as he tried to put out the fire from inside of him. His body only stopped moving when there was nothing left of him but a charred husk. I shivered at the power I had received, but in the doorway, the mangled, blood-covered corpse of my mother caught my attention. Now, the pact is sealed, and 3 souls damned for 1 consumed. Bring me 3 more souls and 1 for your own, or you suffer the fate of those you've damned 3-fold. It grinned, and then the corpse collapsed, lifeless and broken. I frowned. What? I looked into a nearby mirror and saw my reflection staring back at me. Behind the dirt, rust, and grime, I saw my reflection deviated from my motions. Soon a vision of my skin ripped from my body reflected at me, and flames consumed my flesh in the mirror. A soundless scream emitted from my reflection before the mirror shattered. Fear gripped me at the vision it showed me, but it did not deter me. Nothing ever would deter me again. Because now I am well versed in the dealings and trade-offs of demonic pacts. Ariok was the first demon I made a pact with, but he was far from the last. All that was why, if I would carry his baby, I would be on top. I will not lie, a demon is a good lay. I had screwed Fernando plenty of times in preparing him for this ritual, but he wasn't like this. A demon knows lust a lot better than a mortal for carnal desire, I guess. I didn't expect to get pleasure out of the deal, but I was far from complaining as the 2 of us crested over together. Heat filled my loins as he ground into me, more than just mortal seed passing into me. His spirit flowed inside of me, and I felt a union much stronger than I ever had before. That's when there was a knock at the door. Ariok growled, "Get rid of them so we can continue." "You want more?" I rolled my eyes, getting to my feet. I stepped over Sasha's corpse and made sure I had no blood on my face or hands. I'm not complaining, mind you, but you don't want to take a break? No, Ariok growled. Fine, I acquiesced. Give me a moment to get rid of our visitors. I patted down the staircase, throwing on one of Sasha's silk robes. Whoever was at the door would hopefully feel embarrassed to see the lady of the home in nothing but her nightgown. The knocking ceased entirely. I was just barely in view of the door when someone smashed it in. 4 police officers rushed in to my utter shock. This was not good, not the right time. I had to conclude my pact with Ariok. If I was in prison, I couldn't do it, and I shuddered to think what would happen if I failed him. As if my heart could sink no lower, a priest walked in. He had salt and pepper hair, brown eyes, looked to be in his mid-50s. He glared at me. Are you Bella? I nodded, maybe hoping to get out of this. Seize the witch, he said, rushing up the stairs. 2 men grabbed me, and I shouted, What's the meaning of this? How did he know what I was? The priest stopped on the stairs while police rushed upstairs. I received a text message from Sasha. She said you killed her. I heard Ariok growl upstairs. 1 policeman shouted, Father Thomas, help! Father Thomas rushed up the staircase. That was the first time I met the priest that would be the bane of my existence. Father Edward Thomas.